In 1992, Paramount Pictures released the milquetoastly named Cool World. After the smashing success of Disney's Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they were one of the only studios that attempted to make a film that was a full mixture of animated and live-action actors sharing the screen at the same time, with Ralph Bakshi at the helm. Bakshi is a prolific animated filmmaker best known for his adult animated film Fritz the Cat, the first and one of the only X-rated films in existence, along with his other animated works. There's Wizards, a film that takes place in a fantasy Tolkien-esque world. The rotoscoped film Fire and Ice. An adaptation of the actual Tolkien world that everyone remembers watching on VHS. If you want to know more about him, type up his name in that search bar above and watch any of the videos you find that goes into way more detail, or on Google on whatever browser you prefer. Anyway, he was inspired to make a film in the same vein as Roger Rabbit, but as a horror flick rather than the buddy cop comedy one Disney made. Sounds interesting, right? I mean, the idea of humans and cartoons existing in the same space is already terrifying of a concept as it is. Probably the reason Evil Toons was conceived. It sounds way different than what Disney put out and would have been somewhat novel for a horror film, especially for a live-action animated hybrid. So the film would end up as one of his more successful projects, correct? No, not really. Cool World is only brought up in mainstream conversation between those with an interest in animation, Bakshi enthusiasts, or fans of Roger Rabbit. And after watching the film, I can see why that's the case. Let's start out with the pros. Animation and backgrounds. Compared to Roger Rabbit, the cardboard-like backgrounds make it distinct from other films that have tried to have live actors in a cartoon setting or background. It looks more similar to a stage play rather than an actor green-screened into a scene. And yes, some people will think it looks kinda cheap compared to just having the actors added in after filming, but I'd say it's actually more natural for the scenery to be set up this way. Like, isn't this how the world would work with 3D people in a 2D cartoony space? Background elements would make sense as being on a different layers compared to a person, but would be flat to a tune. I'd say it's a good compromise between both realms. Not sure if many other people would agree with me in that regard, but I like that aspect of the film's set design. And the animation is just flawless. It's by Ralph Bakshi. Him and his team usually do great work. Sometimes his style will be more scribbly and less refined. Other times it will be detailed and more realistic. It really depends on what the story and mood he wants to set for the project that he's working on. I appreciate the animation even more in hindsight, since getting a hand-drawn feature-length film from a Western-based studio is a very rare sight now. Along with the diminishing usage of proper 2D animation in mainstream media that isn't merely puppet or flash-like animation. Another pro. There's Maurice LaMarche. You know, Kif from Futurama. And Brain from Spielberg's Pinky and the Brain. Yeah, him. He plays the voice of Dr. Whiskers, Jack when he becomes a superhero, and other various background voices. And, that's all the things I consider good about the film. So I guess it's time for the cons then. While this isn't the biggest flaw with the movie, I want to start out with this con in particular since it's kind of intertwined with the plot summary. So we start out in 1945 Las Vegas. Our MC of the film, war veteran Frank Harris, is welcomed home by his mom. They go back home to enjoy suburban life after the horrors he's witnessed. Before having dinner, Frank takes his mom on a joyride with his motorcycle, but due to negligence from a drunk driver and his floozy, they both launch from said motorbike. Frank's PTSD flares up due to this traumatic event, which he's thrown into further distress when he finds his mom lifeless on the ground before him. And while this is horrible enough for this guy who just got home a mere hour or so ago and a real bummer all around, suddenly, this Felix Professor Poindexter-like character pops out of nowhere looking into the going-ons of this horrid situation as if he's flipping through TV channels. This causes him to scream so loud he breaks the barrier between worlds and gets himself teleported into Cool World. Or at least, I assume it's something like that. I think it was actually Dr. Whisker's spike ray gun that did the transporting. They never really explained that. But after that, Dr. Whiskers welcomes his newly transported experiment into his world. That's a pretty basic intro for the film. Surely the rest will basically be a fish out of water isekai kinda story, where Frank learns about Cool World, how things are different compared to real life, finding a way to get back to his world, and explanations for what's happening here, right? Well, no, because then we jump 47 years into the future to 1992 with a simple title card. Suddenly, we're in this prison cell with inmates and a guy who's been without a woman's touch for far too long. His drawing then comes to life before his very eyes and disappears, causing him to painfully fall into another world's nightclub where his Gooner artwork of a character is waiting for him. Or did it? Apparently, this dude is Jack Deebs, a cartoonist turned murderer after finding his wife being unfaithful with another man in their bed. He killed the affair partner, but I would be remiss to state it's possible he killed his wife as well, since we never saw whatever happened to her or hear about her whereabouts thereafter. He believes he created Cool World and all its inhabitants, and once there, or what he believes to be Cool World, Jack starts to question his sanity and reality. He wonders if anything he's experiencing is real or just a dream. It doesn't help that his characters are being coy about what the situation actually is. Okay then, so the film is actually a thriller focusing on Jack and his mental state, and the psychological effects murdering another person in cold blood and prison has on a person. While that would be interesting, that's not at all what the rest of the film is like. Cool World does exist, he's not losing it, and there's no mystery as to what's going on whatsoever, other than everything else. But do you see what I'm trying to get at here? It feels like the film's trying to be two different films at the same time. The first opening minutes of the film don't seem to relate to the movie poster at all. It seemed like an opening to a completely different genre of film. And before we can see the journey of the guy we think is the MC and learn more about him, we are then thrust onto this new guy who is apparently the true MC? We didn't get to know the previous dude beforehand, now we're barely getting to know this new guy. Then it felt like it was going to be a completely different film again. The whole psychological thriller angle I was going on about earlier, where he might be hallucinating and losing his grip on reality for being in jail for so long, and perhaps his guilt from killing his wife's affair partner and possibly also his wife, what got him in jail in the first place. It would have even made sense if he based Holli's design on his previous wife. It would have been good for the audience to try to figure out whether or not Cool World was real and if he was actually being brought to it or if he was just crazy. Could have even had a theme about a creator and his creations and the love/obsession they have with them, and if being attracted to one's work would be weird or taboo in a way. Or do we actually come up with unique ideas and concepts, or do we merely pull them from inspiration elsewhere? Or if a fictional character can be just as real as any other person in real life, or that their creation has a life of their own outside of what the creator originally intended. I just realized they also had such an easy theme right there. Cartoons and escapism. Frank wanting to stay in Cool World instead of having to come to terms with his mom being dead and facing his problems directly if he were to return. Jack is wanting to escape from his real-life troubles by getting lost in the world and characters he created. Like someone who focuses solely on their work or hobbies as a coping mechanism for whatever stress or problem is present in their life. Jack's being his whole ex-murderer and post-prison life. There was so much they could have explored, but they just didn't. And while some people might make the argument that it was the 80s and 90s, most animated films weren't as concerned about making sense and more so just to be entertaining, I feel that doesn't excuse the flip-flopping narrative in the slightest. I might be on the money, considering Bakshi has gone on record saying the script had been reworked without his knowledge prior to filming. So that could explain the weird shifts in tone throughout the film. And apparently, there's a lost screenplay of the original version along with the storyboards that accompany it. Frank was supposed to have gotten it on with a doodle and had a hybrid human Toon Kid that was supposed to be Holli. She then would have escaped the Toon world and gone after her deadbeat dad for killing her mom and abandoning her. It gives me vibes of an inverse Roger Rabbit, where we know the character that's going to commit a crime and why. And it seems like we'd either be following Frank as he tries to stop her, or we follow Holli in her exploits to escape Cool World and kill her father. That's not to say that this is what happened, but this could be how the Jack plot was supposed to turn out. The father that abandoned, or in this case killed, her mother and left Holli to fend for herself. It would make sense as to why that was even briefly mentioned in the comic story scene. From what I could pull from the description, it seems like they had a much clearer goal of where the film would go and what would happen. It also seems that Holli would have been much more fleshed out. Oh yeah, I should probably finish explaining the rest of the film. Holli takes Jack to a nightclub, Frank finds out and wraps him up, warning him not to get freaky with Holli at all costs. Frank confronts Holly on suspicion of hiding annoyed, letting her off with a warning not to get freaky with Jack. Holly and Jack do the do and Holly becomes a real girl. After a quick murder and change of clothes, Jack and Holly get real and hit the town. But oh no, there's trouble in paradise. Not only does Holly no longer want to hang out with nor like Jack after getting what she needed from him, so a wham bam thank you, man? But because Jack and Holly's bodies are becoming unstable and doodling out every so often. He leaves Holly and returns to his place only for Frank to appear somehow in his house despite not knowing where the duo jumped, much less Jack's home of all places. Jack takes Frank to where he last saw Holly, while Holly searches for Vegas Vinny in a desperate attempt to find the spike to stabilize her condition. This weird short turtle disguise wearing individual suddenly approaches her and takes note of her condition, and warns her not to do anything funny. But it turns out this trench-coated individual is none other than Vegas Vinny, who is actually Dr. Whiskers. Wow, shocker, who thought the familiar sounding character who disappeared since the beginning of the movie would be the one and the same? Frank chases after Holly. She pulls cartoon shenanigans, shifting through walls due to doodle physics, I guess? After being cornered, she pushes Frank off the building and ascends to cartoon godhood by reaching the spike. She unleashes a Ghostbusters-style conflict onto the world, spilling doodles everywhere and bringing an inky apocalypse to the human realm. With Frank dead, only Jack can stop her for some reason. I think it's because he has the same glitched out abilities like her. Either that or because it's his shoehorned destiny that he's supposed to stop her. Not because he caused this whole thing to begin with. There's a brief sequence of the world becoming an Adult Swim animated series. Jack, in his superhero form, returns the spike back to the building and saves the world, crisis averted. Frank is brought back to Cool World, where Deus Ex Machina happens and he comes back to life, as a doodle. Cause apparently any Noid that is brought to Cool World and is killed by a doodle becomes a doodle themselves. Wait a minute. I have an idea I'll get back to later. Okay, so that's basically Cool World. Makes total sense, yeah? I hope not, because that leads into my biggest point of contention with the film. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter what kind of story you want to tell or what genre, there has to be a logic of sorts for the audience to follow. If not, it takes down all the other aspects of the story along with it. Consequences aren't spelled out, so there's no stakes to anything. Characters and what they do, the plot, the themes, the meaning of the story loses any impact it could have. There's no rhyme or reason for anything to happen. And all of these problems go back to that main point. I don't even know where to begin when trying to point out all the things that don't make sense. Guess I'll just go down my notes in whatever order I have them in. Why can't doodles leave Cool World? If the Doctor was able to leave and live a life in doodle form in the human world, why would it be bad for Holly to do the same thing? Why can Holly only escape by getting it on with a Noid? How does Holly know this information? Who made these rules, and how does everyone know them? What's the downside of Holly becoming human? If anything, the only bad thing was Holly tuning out every so often. There wasn't anything bad happening to the real world and Cool World until she tried to get the spike from Vegas. What was the point of Neighbor Girl? What was the point of mentioning Jack's murder? Frank did not die a hero. He died for nothing. He did not have to die at that point in the film. Narratively, it would have made more sense for Jack to have died and for Frank to stop Holly at this point than for Jack to do so. And if they did stick with the same ending, they should not have brought Frank back to life. He should have remained dead. It would have been a good parallel to the opening of the film where his mom was looking for him and worried when she didn't see him at first. It would have ended in a similar manner. His doodle girlfriend worried for his safety, only to lay eyes on him and see that he's dead. Also, wouldn't Cool World be a horrible place for Frank to live in 20 plus years? It shows he has flashbacks and PTSD from his time serving, and with all the explosions, gunshots, loud noises, and falling objects, wouldn't he be an absolute wreck living in this kind of world? Especially if he's in a job that requires being in stressful and dangerous situations. Why would him and Nails not know how to stop Holly's plan? They know what she wants and the suspects and the places of interest to keep an eye on. So why didn't they just arrest Holly or keep a stakeout at her place or stop her at all costs? Frank merely states wouldn't want to keep an eye on them 24/7 or something like that and decides not to stake them out even though it's obvious what she's planning? Like, yeah, it's supposed to show he's a good guy that cares about his girlfriend more than his job, but like, If this really could lead to a world-ending disaster as the audience is supposed to believe, shouldn't Frank be more concerned with preventing such a cataclysmic event from happening? I don't know about you, but I know I would be forgiving and understanding to my special someone for leaving me high and dry when the literal world is at stake. But since Frank and everyone else seems mellow about it, I guess it can't be that bad, right? And also, Frank was a former soldier from the 1940s that also became a cop. You're telling me this guy wouldn't be the harsh, shoot first, ask questions later kind of cop? We even see him rough up Jack a bit when he spotted him in the nightclub when he was frisking him. I don't know why, but I find that hard to believe. Why did Nails suddenly feel guilty about disrupting Frank and his girlfriend? Maybe it's just because they didn't show them bonding enough to warrant that level of concern to me, but I assume they've been partners for a while now since it's been 40 years. Then again, we don't know how long they've been together. For all we know, they've only been partners for a week at this point. We've seen earlier in the film some extra cops, and what I assume to be cops when Frank first arrived in Cool World, so why isn't there more than one team of cops? Why are Frank and Nails the only two that try to keep Doodles from engaging in world-shattering behavior? You'd think that'd be a major point of concern amongst all in Cool World. What did the Doctor mean by living out his destiny and being a hero? This is the first time they mentioned Jack having a destiny with anything. It would have made much more sense if he had said something like, he's finally being what he always wanted to be, a character like in his comics. Could have even worked with the whole is Cool World real or is he just losing it angle. Why was Frank brought back to life, merely so the movie could end on a happier note? How would his girlfriend know that Noise become toons if killed by a doodle? Much less how Nails knew how Frank died exactly, since he wasn't there until after he was dead. The Doctor probably told him, but that's a hard stretch for the Doctor to have been able to see Holly change into a toon way up on that building and see her push him purposely to his death. What if he just fell trying to help Holly? Jack not doing anything with the pen after Frank told him how dangerous it is, or Frank not confiscating it himself, is also a head scratcher. The only thing it ever really did was give a drink to Nails and merely for Holly to get her hands on it and only use it twice. Then again, they're not that good at keeping the world order as it is, so maybe it's too much to expect Frank to be competent at his job. How does Mind Slip work, and how do you choose where you go? It seems whenever you Mind Slip, you return to the same place or around the same area as to when you left. Jack would always spawn a foot or so above when returning from Cool World. Although we only see Frank mind slip twice throughout the entire film, we can assume the same logic applies to him. So he should be able to slip back to where he was when he first mind slipped, that being in that random stretch of desert where he saw his mom die. So how did Frank end up where Jack mind slipped to? The only thing I can reasonably think of is the place he jumped was where Jack's current house was built. And while that kinda makes sense, it seems too perfect that the place Frank's mom died is exactly where Jack's current house was built. It's just too coincidental. Like, what if there was a solid wall in that exact place he mind jumped originally? Would he just be obliterated on returning to the real world? On the topic of mind slipping, how was Jack brought into the Toon World in the first place? Was it Holly or was that Jack? How did Whiskers even know where Holly was at that specific time? I don't think he even knew it was her until she doodled out right before his very eyes. He also mentions that no one can hold the spike. So his idea was to place this object of immense power that could end the cool and real world on the building top? I guess he's already calculated for storms or disaster-based threats that could knock the spike off the building. Even though the simplest solution would be to keep the spike in Cool World where it would be relatively safer. If the spike can't be touched by anyone, how did the Doctor even move the spike into the real world? And not to mention, both Holly and Jack were able to remove and hold the spike individually. So either the Doc was just bluffing and wanted to keep her away from the spike, or he just didn't want anyone else to have it, which I'm more inclined to believe. My other main issue with the film is the characters themselves. Characters have little motivation in what they're doing and why. While I appreciate the animated characters in the background of the scenes, they kind of feel pointless in a way. Like, yeah, they help flesh out the world of Cool World, but only by making it seem more lively than it actually is. Even though the scenery is filled, it feels hollow, like a lot of towns in video games where there's tons of people and buildings, but it just doesn't seem lived in. That was one of the good parts about Roger Rabbit and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers to an extent. It showed the toons in the background as just living their lives and going on about their days. not all of them just being zany or moving just for the mere sake of it. A flaw in relation to Holly's character was that she never felt like a good villain. It never showed why she was bad other than wanting to become a real girl. Other than being described as a femme fatale in some descriptions you can find on the film, Holly seems out of her depth. She wants to become a human instead of a doodle because then she can truly enjoy and experience life to the fullest. And she tries to do that by sleeping with noids that somehow get dragged into their world? But how? How does she know that'll make her real in the first place? It's implied she's tried to do this before and failed. But why hasn't any other toon tried to do the same thing as well? And what else does she have at her disposal other than being a sexy vixen? If her only plan is to sleep with someone to become human, what will she do if that doesn't work? She's not super smart or acrobatically inclined, so it's not like she could try to even find another way to become real. If anything, they should have made her more menacing and terrifying. Imagine Frank explains to Jack that she's tried to pull different things with noids that get pulled into Cool World, and it always ends badly for them. Such as, she's tried to drink their blood to become a noid, has tried to eat their flesh, made a suit out of their skin, has tried transplanting their organs as her own. These examples may make her seem like a sociopath, and as I say it out loud, I can see why. But it doesn't necessarily have to be what I said. It could be any number of things, as long as it makes her threatening as a villain and to show why she's a threat to noids in Cool World. This could have also even worked with the whole getting it on with a noid plan. Maybe she never tried getting that from a noid. And maybe that essence gives her the temporary ability to become real and enter the real world or something. It would have made more sense as to why she had to do that in particular. You could have even had her working together with the doctor behind the scenes to figure out how to get a toon from Cool World into the real world. They were both shown to have the same goal, could have had a good parallel there. She could have even been the one conducting experiments on behalf of the doctor on the noids that were brought into Cool World, so that the doctor could have a facade on the townspeople and any wary noids that cross over. It also would have explained why those doodles do her bidding for some odd reason. Personally, I think it's because she's the hottest doodle in Cool World. That's the only thing that makes sense why any of these characters would follow Holly of all people. Also, she may have been a bit too naive for someone who wants to become real. She doesn't seem to understand the customs of regular people and etiquette and such. You'd think someone so fascinated with becoming real wouldn't have already spent hours on learning or how to mimic regular people from the films she watches. You could have even made her act like how they would in movies instead of trying to interact how normal people would, to show how she put what she learned into practice. Jack and Harris make for bad main characters. They probably have both of them in the film in an attempt to make one competent character together. You never get to learn or love either of them. You know very little about their lives except a few small details. I can't even really get a true grasp on their personalities, especially Jack's. He's all gun-ho about being with Holly, but later on he's like, nah. That could be explained by Holly berating him in the car, but still. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right in a way. Not to mention, once Jack becomes a superhero, he becomes even dumber than when he was a human. So after saying he'll do something right for a change, once he's a superhero and on his way to return the spike to the building, Holly comes around and asks him in her most sultry voice to hand the spike back to her, which he almost does. Why? I thought it showed they had a falling out earlier, and Jack even stated he was gonna do the right thing. It's not even a fake out either, where it looks like Jack was going to hand over the spike to Holly just to fly away and put it back in. Cause the only thing that stopped him from handing it over was a Nails ink blot thing appearing and being snide about the spike. And before the end card, we can see he's planning on setting up a home for him and Holly despite everything that's happened. So I guess Jack is just a simp at the end of it all? That's supposed to be his character arc through the entire film? Really? Then again, he has been in jail for a long time. He's a very lonely man. I just remembered Frank is a man out of time. So it's kinda weird he's not fazed when he finally returns to the real world when it's been almost 50 years since he's last been here at all. Even Austin Powers experienced more of a culture shock when he was awoken in his film, and that was only a difference of 30 years. Why did Frank decide to become a cop in Cool World? And why is he enforcing these rules against Noid-Doodle relations? How does he know what happens if Doodles and Noids get it on? What kind of experiments exactly did Frank and Whiskers perform? And this could just be me, but I feel like Brad Pitt's character seemed half-baked. His character and scenes seemed more tacked on in comparison to the other parts of the film. And perhaps his role was changed drastically from what it was originally and haphazardly morphed into whatever this is. Oh yeah, that thing I hinted at earlier. Frank mentioned earlier in the film that Holly has been trying to do any Noid that has crossed in the cool world, and Jack isn't the first. We've seen what a human to Doodle looks like from Frank's miraculous recovery, and he has a very humanoid shape. And we've seen another Doodle in a human form that isn't overtly grotesque, or with exaggerated features, who is also implied to be involved with Holly. Sparks. The yellow hair guy with the red suit. He has some unknown relation to Holly, as if they're a thing. What if he was a Noid that fell or mind slipped into Cool World before? As in, he was one of the Noids Holly tried to get it on with, but he was probably killed by a Doodle before they could get that far, making him end up as a Doodle. It makes sense why he's infatuated with her to some extent, while Holly is dismissive of his entire presence. She has no need for a non-Noid entity. The same way Jack was treated once she no longer had a use for him. Not to mention, his character does not serve any role to the story whatsoever. His dialogue and placement throughout the film could have easily been replaced by any auxiliary character, and the film still would have ended up the same. And maybe this is because his role was reduced from what it was originally supposed to be. Which, again, could go back to the studio meddling and how this is not the cool world originally envisioned. Nails is never really explained, he's just a bug cop thing and Frank's partner. Other than his voice, we don't get a grasp for his character either. I don't have much to say on Nails because, again, we barely get to know him and he's supposed to be like the buddy to the main character. The only thing I could say is that Nails could have stopped Holly from escaping Cool World just merely by shooting her once she was a human. If it's common knowledge that humans killed in Cool World come back as a Doodle, Nails had no excuse not to blast her. Holly would have come back in her normal form, and her plans would be ruined. In fact, you could have used that as a scene to foreshadow Harris coming back to life, and the scene could have still ended with Nails getting inked by being caught off guard or something. The most developed character, and that's being generous, is Holly, and even then it's I want to become real at all costs. Then you get a bit of character when she reveals she just wants to enjoy her newfound freedom. But it still falls flat, and that's saying something when your lame villain is the most developed of all your characters in a film, and even then she's not that good. I wanted to like this movie, and I do like the animation, but that's it. I also love the potential of what it could have been. They could have gone so many different angles, but chose the most confusing and frankly incoherent way to go about it. It had good potential for storytelling, but failed to live up to anything other than being a fourth-rate Roger Rabbit wannabe. Join me next time when I review Monkey Bone, in which I'll see if Brendan Fraser outdoes himself compared to his performance in the iconic Mummy film from 2 years earlier, or if it's just monkey business all the way through.